Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. What you're about to witness is a play that, in all likelihood, you've seen before. It's one of the most iconic plays in the history of the Miami Dolphins, and maybe one of the most iconic plays in the history of the NFL. This was the famous hook and ladder at the end of the first half of the 1981 divisional against the San Diego Chargers, in one of the greatest games ever played. Even though the Dolphins lost this game, the man who pitched this ball will forever be remembered in Dolphins history. That man was a wide receiver named Duriel Harris. And what's crazy is that 2 years before this play, he wanted nothing to do with the Dolphins. He was incredibly disgruntled, was fed up with the team, and begged his way out of the city. In 1979, the Miami Dolphins were somewhat of a chaotic mess, with Harris being the main guy to fuel the fire. You have a receiver criticizing his team and his quarterback, a quarterback criticizing his receiver, and a whole mess of problems. Buckle up for the wild ride that we're about to go on. This is the story of the drama surrounding Duriel Harris and the 1979 Miami Dolphins. Before I talk about the drama itself, and before I talk about the straw that broke the camel's back, we need some context to understand just who Harris is, why he was frustrated, and what it was about a particular game that led to the demise of the team's chemistry that season. Our story begins in 1976, when the Dolphins drafted the New Mexico State wide receiver in the third round. The idea behind the pick was pretty simple. Miami did not exactly have a great receiving unit in 1975, and the man lining opposite Nat Moore was Howard Twilley, who was going to be 33 years old in 1976 and didn't have a whole lot left in the tank. Miami was hoping that Harris could provide some depth in that department and be an option alongside Freddie Solomon to get some increased playing time with Twilley's declining play. Harris got on the field in 1976, but he didn't do a whole lot. But after Twilley retired in 1977, Harris began to make an impact in the receiving game. Bob Griese made the Pro Bowl that year, and one of his favorite targets was Harris, who had 34 receptions for 601 yards and 5 touchdowns. All these totals were second on the team, only behind Pro Bowl and first-team All-Pro wideout Nat Moore, and his 17.7 yards per catch led all players on the Dolphins. To put into perspective how surprisingly well Harris played, there were only 7 receivers in the league to put up 600 yards, 17 yards per catch, and 5 touchdowns. Those guys were Ken Burrow, John Stallworth, Mel Gray, Sammy White, Steve Largent, Gene Washington, and Duriel Harris. By 1978, Harris had worked his way firmly into the starting lineup, as he helped Griese make another Pro Bowl by recording a career-high 45 receptions for a career-high 654 yards. The 654 yards also led the team in receiving. And he came up clutch when it mattered most. In the regular season finale against the New England Patriots on Monday Night Football, needing a win to host the wildcard round against the Houston Oilers, Harris posted 93 yards receiving to help his team win the game and host their first playoff game since 1973. Things were looking good for Harris and company. That would all change when 1979 rolled around, because that year, tensions between Harris and everyone would reach an all-time high. The Miami Dolphins were flying high offensively in 1978. They scored 372 points, which was the second most in football, and just 12 points off the Dallas Cowboys for the top total. Bob Griese was a Pro Bowler and completed 63% of his passes, which was the best percentage in all of football. For some perspective on how good that was back then, only 2 other quarterbacks completed 59% of their passes or better. But in 1979, it was clear that something was off. The offense was sputtering a bit, especially when it came to the passing game. The good news for the Dolphins was that they were still pretty good and they started the season off with a 4-0 record. The bad news was that Griese was far from what he was over the previous 2 seasons. At the age of 34, looked like a shell of his former self. In the opening game of the season, Griese only threw for 139 yards with no touchdowns and an interception, and a passer rating barely above 50. In a Week 6 game against the Raiders, where the Dolphins lost 13-3, Griese only had 106 yards passing, throwing no touchdowns, 2 picks, and posting an abysmal passer rating of 29.6, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball to the ground on every single play. He followed that up with a loss to the Patriots, where he threw 2 picks and had a mere 57 yards passing. And perhaps no man was more frustrated about Griese's poor play over the first half of the 1979 season than Duriel Harris. Harris had some moments of brilliance in the first half. He had 5 receptions for 117 yards in a 19-10 victory over the Seattle Seahawks, leading all receivers in receiving yards, and posting that many yards when no one else in Miami had more than 25 that day. He had a game against the Green Bay Packers where in a 27-7 victory, he recorded a franchise record 10 receptions for 180 yards and a touchdown. The problem was that these games were few and far between, and it wasn't because Harris was playing poorly, but rather was because Griese couldn't get him the ball and push it down the field. Harris played in 8 of the team's first 9 games.
missing a 33-27 loss against the New York Jets due to a groin injury. He failed to record a reception in 3 of them. When arguably the best receiver on the team is being held without a catch in over 37% of his team's games, something is wrong. Tensions were starting to rise, with Harris being frustrated about his lack of production. But in Week 10, the Dolphins were set to take on the Houston Oilers in a Monday Night Football game. And what happened in this game changed just about everything. November 5th, 1979, is the Dolphins against the Oilers at the Orange Bowl in front of a national television audience in a rematch of the 1978 wildcard round. This is a really big game for both teams. Right now, the Dolphins are 6-3, half a game back of the 7-3 New England Patriots atop the AFC East. The Oilers are 6-3 also, half a game back of the Cleveland Browns and Denver Broncos for the final wildcard spot, and a game and a half back of the Pittsburgh Steelers for the AFC Central lead. Whoever wins this game improves their odds tremendously at making the postseason, as being 7-3 through 10 weeks puts you in a really good spot heading into the home stretch. Miami's defense came to play. They've been fantastic all season, and entered this game having allowed just 133 points all season, which was the top total in the league. And in this game, they only allowed 9 points on 3 field goals. Earl Campbell had less than 4 yards per carry. The Oilers had 11 net passing yards and finished the game with less than 200 total yards. The only player on the Oilers to have more than 1 reception was Tim Wilson, a fullback who had 2 catches for 4 yards. Whatever happened in this game, you can't blame it on the defense whatsoever, because they did their job and then some. The offense, on the other hand, was looking to turn things around after a lackluster start to the season, where they had scored the 4th fewest points of any team in the AFC. And as you can probably guess, that didn't happen. On the first drive, they go 3-and-out. On the second drive, thanks to some good starting field position, they get a field goal out of it to leave 3-0, but it easily could have been a touchdown. Bob Griese missed Duriel Harris wide open in the end zone, and wasn't targeting him despite looking in his direction, and despite the fact that Harris had no defender in the same zip code as he was. If I had to guess, if there was any particular play that broke the camel's back, it was this one right here. On the third drive, they go 3-and-out. On the fourth drive, they get nothing after Griese waited way too long to throw this pass to Harris. He had him wide open, but the play takes too long to develop, and Harris is visibly frustrated. The fifth drive ends in a turnover. The sixth drive results in the end of the half, with Miami having just 3 points so far. The seventh drive ends in a punt after Griese takes an ill-advised sack. The eighth drive ends in a punt. They get a field goal on the ninth drive to cut it to a 9-6 game, but those would be the last points that they would score, as the Dolphins turned it over on their next 3 drives. With under 2 minutes left and in field goal range, Griese threw this terrible interception which sealed the deal and gave the Oilers the low-scoring win. And by this point, Harris was furious. He couldn't take it anymore. He had no catches in the game despite being wide open at multiple points. Griese wasn't getting him the ball and couldn't throw deep. After this loss, Harris made his message clear: get me out of Miami. After this game, Harris was very critical of his quarterback. 1 week after having 10 receptions, he saw no reason why he wasn't targeted throughout the game, despite opportunities being there to get him the football. He said we didn't challenge them with our play calling. We played a contender and we choked up. Then Harris added, I know what I can do to help this team, but if I don't get the ball, I can't help. It's frustrating to work hard all week in practice for this. Now after comments like this, you would expect Griese to own up to his poor play, in a game where he had a passer rating barely above 40 and threw no touchdowns and 2 interceptions, including the absolutely critical one at the end of the game. But instead of doing that, he defended himself and took a shot at Harris, saying we took what they gave us. They were double covering the receivers. I'm getting tired of hearing grumbling from my own team. Now you had a receiver beefing with his quarterback, and the quarterback firing back. It got so bad that Harris was spending film sessions defending himself, with head coach Shula giving Harris the opportunity to point out what he was referring to. And the following week, even though the Dolphins won 19-0 over the anemic Baltimore Colts, Harris once again finished with no receptions. In his first 10 games, Harris had been held without a catch in 5 of them. Harris wanted out at this point. He spoke to his lawyer and said that he wanted to be traded. Harris was frustrated at Griese and the coaching staff, and said it wasn't fair that he was being used as a scapegoat. Harris even listed a bunch of preferable trade destinations, saying that he'd like to be traded anywhere except someplace like Minnesota or Green Bay. It's easy to see why Harris was frustrated. During his most recent 6-game stretch, he was held without a catch in 4 of those games. Now the coaching staff was upset at him that he was lashing his frustrations out at the media, and his own quarterback was upset at him for calling him out. It was just not a good environment for him to be in. And not only was he trying to talk his way out of Miami after this, but Shula said that after the season, if he still felt this way, he would be more than willing to trade him and satisfy his wishes. So how did the saga wind up finishing? Well, Harris didn't seem so upset by the time the season ended. and it had something to do with Shula doing something once considered unthinkable. In Week 12, the Dolphins were traveling to Cleveland to take on the Browns. Through 3 quarters, the Dolphins were trailing 17-10, and Griese was playing terribly, going 10 for 21 with 115 yards, no touchdowns, 2 picks, and a passer rating of 25. Shula made the decision to yank the legend and put in the backup quarterback Don Strock, and the Dolphins looked better because of it. Strock threw 2 touchdowns in the 4th quarter, and even though the Dolphins lost in overtime, Harris actually got the ball and finished the game with 119 yards. After this game, Shula decided that he was going to bench Griese and start Strock for the rest of the season. Shula called it a tough decision to replace someone of Griese's caliber, but after what Strock did off the bench to put life in that offense, it was a move that had to be done. And with Strock in the lineup, Harris's numbers skyrocketed. After the 119 yards he had against the Browns, he followed that up with 7 receptions for 116 yards and 2 touchdowns in a win against the Baltimore Colts. Over the first 11 weeks of the season, Harris had just 23 receptions for 428 yards. Over the final 5 weeks, he had 19 receptions for 370 yards. Extrapolate that 5-game stretch to a 16-game season, and you have 60 receptions for 1,184 yards. With those numbers, it's easy to see after that, especially with Miami making it to the postseason again, why Harris seemed to drop his trade request. And it was good for Miami that he did, because Harris wound up playing with the Dolphins from 1980 to 83, and then finished his career with the Dolphins in 1985. He played 9 seasons in Miami, finishing with 269 receptions for 4,534 yards and 18 touchdowns, which is a pretty solid output for a 3rd-round pick out of New Mexico State. Of course, he's best known for that play I talked about earlier on the hook and ladder. But they're not in that spot if earlier in the season, trailing 10-3 late in the 4th quarter facing a 4th down situation, he doesn't make this touchdown catch on Monday Night Football against the Philadelphia Eagles to tie the game, which Miami eventually won. He's had his fair share of iconic moments with the team, and is remembered pretty fondly to this day as being a staple of the Dolphins offense in that weird transition period between the Super Bowls and Dan Marino. But it almost never happened after the drama that happened in 1979. Because even back then, what receivers wanted more than anything else was for their quarterback to get them the football. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Monday and Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.